My name is John Proctor, and this is my Draw My Life video. The story I'm about to tell you is set in 1692, Salem, Massachusetts, which was the worst year of my life.
This is me, John Proctor. I'm a local farmer who lives on the skirts of the town. I'm quite a blunt, stern man, and I absolutely hate hypocrites. Although I have one secret that changed my entire life. Abigail Williams and I had an affair. But what makes it terrible is that I'm happily married and in love with my wife, Elizabeth Proctor. This is Elizabeth. When Elizabeth found out about my affair with Abigail, who was working for us at the time, she was very upset because she has very high moral standards and is a good Christian woman, but can be cold at times. This is Abigail Williams. She is Reverend Parris's niece. She once worked as a maid for Elizabeth and I. Around people she wishes to please. She is a very innocent, charming, sweet girl, but she has a dark side. She is very intelligent, an excellent liar, and can be terrifying when crossed. This is John Hale. He is a minister known throughout Salem for being an expert on witchcraft. He first appears in my story after Reverend Parris calls him to Salem to examine his daughter Betty, who had fallen into a strange stupor after Parris caught her and the others dancing in the forest. He is a very strong supporter of God. He is committed to Christianity and a hater of witchcraft. This is Reverend Parris. He is the minister of Salem's church. He is a very paranoid, scared to ruin his reputation kind of person. Much of the town dislike him, including myself. This is Tituba, Reverend Parris's slave from Barbados. After being forced to do so by the girls, she led the chanting and dancing in the forest the previous night. Giles Corey. He is an elderly but feisty farmer in Salem, famous for his tendency to file lawsuits. This is Mary Warren. She is our servant at the Proctor household, and a member of Abigail's group of girls. She is a timid girl, easily influenced by those around her. Susanna, Betty, and Mercy are also part of Abigail's group of girls. These are the Putnams. Thomas Putnam is a wealthy, influential citizen of Salem. Putnam holds a grudge against Francis Nurse for preventing Putnam's brother-in-law from being elected to the office of minister. This is Anne Putnam, Thomas Putnam's wife. Anne Putnam has given birth to 8 children, but only Ruth Putnam survived. The other 7 died before they were a day old. Anne is convinced that these were murder by supernatural means.
The story starts with Parris's daughter Betty lying inert on the bed as he kneels by her side. Because of Parris's fear of his bad reputation, he is afraid that the rumor of Betty being a victim of witchcraft that is spreading through Salem will completely destroy him. Parris has sent for Reverend John Hale of Beverly, as he is supposedly an expert on witchcraft. Parris has already confronted and asked Abigail about his discovering of her, Betty, Tituba, and several other girls dancing in the forest in the middle of the night. He saw Tituba waving her arms over a fire and chanting. Parris also thinks that he has spotted someone running naked through the forest. What Parris doesn't know is that the girls were actually trying to do witchcraft. I later found out that Abigail drank chicken blood as a part of a charm to kill my wife, Elizabeth. When Parris asks, Abigail denies this and said it were merely sport. This is the story that I heard around town, and it started this whole craze. The Putnams enter the room and start pressuring Parris to admit to witchcraft. They are important people in the town, and Parris needs them to support him. Eventually, he leaves the room to talk and sing with the people downstairs. I soon enter the room to find Abigail, Mercy, and Mary with Betty. As soon as I enter, Mercy and Mary leave. I think that Abigail must have threatened them about not telling anyone about the witchcraft that they did the previous night. Anyway, once we were alone, she was all over me. I was trying to resist like the good Christian man I am. She told me she was still in love with me, and she blames Elizabeth for ending our relationship. But I told her not to talk about Elizabeth like that, and we could never happen. She was pissed. As soon as Becky heard the psalms being sung downstairs, she clasped her ears and whined loudly. People from downstairs started to rush up to Betty's aid. Rebecca Nurse is probably the most saintly person in the town and calmed her down just by her presence. The Putnams were there, insisting that it was all witchcraft. I got angry and started to argue with them, and soon Giles Corey joined in. Finally, Reverend Hale arrived, and he started to question people. The answers that people gave made Abigail look bad, and she started to take defense. She blamed Tituba for everything, and everyone, of course, believed her. Tituba was brought in, and Hale accused her of working for the devil. She told him what he wanted to hear, or she might have been hanged. She said that she has been working for the devil, and he has been trying to convince her to kill people. The Putnams start suggesting names of people that they had disliked, and asking if they had worked for the devil. Tituba had broken down by then and started to name people, and Abigail picked it up as well. All the people that got accused get arrested.
No. This part of the story starts off with Elizabeth and I sharing a meal together at our home. I tried to talk to her, but everything she said back seemed cold, and she seemed bothered. It had been 7 months since Abigail and I still don't get how she wouldn't just let it go. Anyways, I told her about Abigail being a fraud and confessing to me while I was at Salem that the dancing had nothing to do with witchcraft. Elizabeth kept telling me to prove to the court that the accusations were a sham, but there was no way of the court believing me, with Abigail's ever so saintly reputation and no evidence or witnesses. By this point I felt as though my own house were a courtroom, with Elizabeth suspicious of my every action. Mary comes in soon after and brings a doll for Elizabeth that she had sewn in court as a gift. She told us that 39 people had now been accused, and Elizabeth had been mentioned as well. Distraught, Elizabeth wanted to know who the accuser was, but Mary would not tell. She was convinced that Abigail had been the accuser, so that she could be with me. Hale then came knocking on our door, questioning the Christian character of this household. He asked each of us to list the 10 commandments along with other questions. I struggled with this and listed all but the commandment prohibiting adultery. I definitely knew of this commandment, but I felt as though I was not worthy, and that it would not be right of me to say this. I felt guilty. Giles and Francis then barged into our home as well, crying that their wives had been arrested. Rebecca was being charged with supernatural murder of Putnam's babies, and Martha was charged with the bewitching of a farmer whose pigs kept dying. Ezekiel Cheever and Herrick arrived with a warrant for Elizabeth's arrest. Hale is surprised with this, as last he checked, Elizabeth was not charged for anything. They then asked if we owned any puppets. We told them none, apart from the one that Mary had given Elizabeth earlier that day. Taking a look at the puppet, Ezekiel and Herrick found a needle stuck in its stomach, and claimed that this was a form of voodoo, and that Paris had found a needle stabbed into Abigail's stomach at dinner that evening. Mary informs the inquisitors that she had stuck the needle in herself for safety precautions. Elizabeth was immediately taken away, and out of anger I ripped the warrant. I then questioned Hale as to why the accuser is always so holy and innocent, and he seemed less and less certain towards the accusations of witchcraft. I demanded at once for Mary to testify in court that she had made the doll and put the needle in it herself. She cried out hysterically and claimed that Abigail would kill her if she did such a thing.
That day, Francis Nurse, Giles Cora, and I went to the court because our wives had either been locked up or condemned. We also brought Mary Warren with us, and we were extremely determined to prove that it was all a fraud. The chief judge was Danforth and also Hale. Francis Nurse presented a list of 91 people signing their names declaring the good opinion of Rebecca Nurse and Martha Corey. Danforth took the list and arrested all 91 people. I brought Mary Warren in after she had wrote up a signed deposition saying that all the girls had been lying about the witchcraft. I explained that Abigail had been caught dancing in the woods by Paris and she was lying about it deliberately to get people arrested and hung. Danforth brought in the other girls, and Abigail, being herself, denied the accusation. Danforth asked Mary Warren to fake it like she did in the courtroom, but she couldn't without the other girls. Abigail started to act like Mary Warren was threatening her with her spirit, and soon the other girls joined in. I started to get really annoyed, and I could feel the anger growing inside of me. Then I grabbed a shock Abigail by the hair and called her a whore, even though it completely ruined my reputation. Then I faced the court and said that we had sexual relations. To test my claim, Danforth brought in Liz and asked if it was true. She denied it because she wanted to protect me, and Danforth dismissed the charge. Hale, however, began to believe me. Abigail went back to her trick of acting like Mary Warren was threatening her until she broke down and pointed at me and shouted, "John Proctor has been working for the devil." I was grabbed and arrested.
It was the dawn before Rebecca Nurse and I and 10 others were to be hanged. As a result of the trials, many villagers had been arrested or hanged, leaving cows to wander the streets, crops to rot, and orphans loose. Paris had also stated that Abigail and Mercy vanished from Salem, robbing him of all his money. Hale visited the jail and tried to get them to confess, as he felt that it would be his fault if they were to hang. Danforth hoped that Elizabeth would be able to persuade me to confess to witchcraft, and allowed her to see me. I was very indecisive. I didn't want to have died as a hero, as I knew I was a bad man and that I had sinned committing adultery. And so I decided to confess, as since I was bad, I thought I might as well stay alive and support my family, and become a better man. Danforth and Hathorne were overjoyed after hearing this, and Ezekiel had immediately grabbed a paper, a pen, and ink to write the confession on. When asked, I admitted that I worked for Satan, referring to the sin of adultery that I had committed, but when asked for Satan's other helpers, I kept quiet. Hale and Paris tried to persuade them to accept the confession anyway, but when I was given the paper to sign, I could not do it. I had already given up my soul by lying, and my name was all I had left. If they were to pin this onto the church door, my children would then have to suffer for my disgrace. Having decided my fate, and finally feeling goodness in myself, I ripped up the confession. I was then put to hang, but all in all I felt happier than I did before.